They thought they could waltz back into Australia like royalty, but instead, they've been hit with a brutal message that's echoing across the entire country: we don't want you here. And what's even more shocking, it's not just the public turning their backs, it's the system itself quietly stepping away, leaving Prince Harry and Meghan Markle standing in a storm they may have created themselves.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will soon be back in Australia. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are reportedly planning to visit Sydney and Melbourne next month. It'll be their first visit since the 2018 Invictus Games.
This was supposed to be their big return, their comeback moment, their grand re-entry into a country that once adored them, celebrated them, practically rolled out the red carpet back in 2018 when everything still looked like a fairy tale. But now, the vibe couldn't be more different. It's icy, it's tense, and beneath the surface, it's explosive. Because behind the headlines and polished appearances, something deeper is happening. Something that feels less like a visit and more like a full-blown rejection. It all started with a petition. Sounds harmless, right? Just another online complaint? No, this one detonated. What began as a simple demand quickly spiraled into one of the most talked about royal controversies of 2026. And the message couldn't have been clearer. Australians are done funding what they see as a private profit-driven tour dressed up in royal branding. Over 30,000 signatures and counting. Think about that number for a second. That's not a fringe opinion. That's a movement, a loud collective voice saying, why should we pay for this? Because here's where things get messy, really messy. Harry and Meghan are no longer working royals. They stepped away. They made that decision back in 2020. They chose independence, business ventures, media deals, Hollywood influence. But now, as they prepare for this April 2026 visit packed with high-priced events and exclusive appearances, the question is haunting everything. If they're private citizens, why is there even an expectation of public support? And the events themselves? Oh, they've raised eyebrows, and not in a good way. Meghan's Sydney appearance, branded as her best life, isn't exactly accessible. We're talking luxury retreat vibes, elite guest lists, and ticket prices pushing beyond $3,000 Australian dollars for a 3-day experience for 300 guests. It's exclusive, curated, and unapologetically high-end. Meanwhile, Harry's stepping onto the stage in Melbourne at a psychosocial safety summit with tickets starting near $2,000. And yes, reports suggest he'll walk away with a hefty speaking fee to match. Now place that against the reality Australians are living right now: rising costs, financial pressure, everyday struggles. You don't need to be a political analyst to see why this hit a nerve. Because suddenly, it's not just about two famous figures visiting a country. It's about optics, it's about timing, and it's about perception. The feeling that this entire trip is less about connection and more about cashing in. And just when you think it couldn't get more intense, the government steps in, or more accurately, steps back. Silence. Complete silence. No confirmations. No announcements. No visible support. Departments that would normally be front and center during a royal visit, they're distancing themselves. The Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, not involved. Home Affairs, not involved. Federal Police, not commenting. It's not just unusual, it's almost unheard of. Because rewind to 2018, when Harry and Meghan were still fully inside the royal system, and Australia treated them like, well, royalty. Security, logistics, official welcomes, everything handled. Everything funded. Now, nothing. And that silence, it speaks volumes. Because here's the uncomfortable truth no one can ignore. Without government backing, a massive question looms over this entire visit. Who is actually responsible for their safety? Yes, event organizers are covering security within venues. Yes, accommodations are arranged. But what happens outside those controlled environments? During transport? During public exposure? In unpredictable situations? These aren't minor concerns. These are serious, real-world risks, especially for two individuals who have openly spoken about threats in the past. And yet, the system isn't stepping in. Why? Because quietly but firmly, the message coming out of Canberra feels unmistakable. You chose this path, now you live with it. And this is where things start circling back to Harry himself. Because none of this happened overnight. This situation, it's been building for years. When Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal duties, they didn't just walk away from responsibilities, they walked away from protections too. State-funded security, official backing, institutional support, gone. And Harry didn't take that quietly. He fought it, legally, publicly. He argued that he still needed that protection, that it wasn't about privilege, but safety. But the courts didn't agree. In fact, by 2025, his legal battle to reinstate that protection had completely collapsed. And now in 2026, the reality is unavoidable. No UK protection, no Australian protection, no automatic safety net. It's a situation filled with irony. Because on one hand, Harry has tried to maintain the influence, the recognition, the global platform that comes with royal identity. But on the other hand, he stepped away from the very system that made those privileges possible. And now, governments are drawing a line. No more blurred roles, no more in-between status. You're either in or you're out. And Australia seems to have made its position crystal clear. But the tension doesn't stop there, because beyond the politics, beyond the finances, beyond the security concerns, there's something even more explosive simmering beneath the surface. A growing perception that Harry and Meghan are still performing royalty without actually being part of it. Their recent international trips, Colombia, Jordan, have already stirred whispers, carefully curated appearances, royal-style imagery, official-looking engagements but without official backing. And now Australia is watching closely and maybe, just maybe, deciding it's had enough. Because when a country starts asking not just what are you doing here, but who exactly do you represent anymore, that's when things stop being a visit and start becoming a reckoning. And just when it seemed like the backlash couldn't get any louder, something even more damaging began unfolding quietly behind the scenes. The kind of shift that doesn't trend instantly but hits harder over time. Because while Australia was pushing back publicly, the empire Harry and Meghan built behind the scenes was starting to crack. Let's talk about Netflix, the deal that once symbolized their independence, their power move, their Hollywood arrival. This wasn't just a contract. It was their statement to the world, we don't need the royal family, we're building something bigger. A reported $100 million partnership, massive expectations, global attention, and now it's unraveling. Quietly, carefully, but undeniably. In early March 2026, something shifted. The partnership tied to Meghan's lifestyle brand, American Riviera Orchard, suddenly came to an end. No dramatic announcement, no explosive press conference, just a subtle, almost surgical detachment. Publicly, everything sounded polite, controlled, diplomatic. But behind the scenes, the whispers tell a completely different story. Because insiders began hinting at frustration, growing, persistent frustration. The same narrative repeated over and over again. The same themes, the same angles, and eventually the same question echoing through executive rooms. Is this still working? And the numbers? They didn't help. Harry's documentary Polo, a project that should have carried prestige, curiosity, and global appeal, barely made a ripple. Ranked somewhere deep in the thousands, around 500,000 households. For a platform like Netflix, that's not just underwhelming, that's alarming, especially when expectations were sky high. And Meghan's content? It didn't land either. Critics didn't hold back. Words like inauthentic, detached, even bizarre started surfacing. Audiences didn't connect. The storytelling didn't resonate. And suddenly, the carefully crafted image of influence began to look fragile. So when Netflix stepped back, even subtly, it wasn't just a business decision. It was a signal that maybe the magic wasn't translating anymore. And now, layer that on top of what's happening in Australia. Because timing is everything. And this couldn't be worse. They're walking into a country where tens of thousands have signed a petition rejecting them, while simultaneously facing questions about whether their global brand is losing momentum. That's not just pressure. That's convergence. And it gets even more complicated when you bring the royal family back into the picture, because whether Harry and Meghan like it or not, that connection never fully disappears, especially when Prince William enters the frame. Because while Harry and Meghan were preparing for their controversial Australia trip, William made a move of his own, subtle, strategic, and incredibly telling. He acknowledged an anniversary tied to the Royal Australian Navy, a gesture rooted in duty, tradition, and official royal connection. No drama, no commentary, just presence. And that contrast, it couldn't be sharper. On one side, you have William representing the crown, supported by the institution, carrying out official responsibilities tied to Commonwealth nations like Australia. On the other side, Harry and Meghan arriving without official roles, without government backing, and without the same legitimacy they once held. It's not just a difference, it's a divide. And according to reports, Meghan may have tried to bridge that divide before the trip, reaching out to Kensington Palace, possibly hoping for some form of support. or at least a softening of the atmosphere. But the response? Silence. No acknowledgement, no visible coordination, nothing. And that silence, it's louder than any statement could ever be, because it reinforces something that's been building for years now, a quiet but firm separation between Harry and the rest of the royal family, especially with William. While King Charles may still leave the door slightly open, William's stance feels different, more defined, more protective of the institution, less willing to blur the lines between official duty and private enterprise. And Australia? It's becoming the stage where that separation is playing out in real time, because this isn't just about a visit anymore, it's about identity, it's about roles, it's about what happens when someone steps away from a system but continues to operate in its shadow. And the public, they're noticing, they're questioning, and increasingly they're pushing back, which brings us back to that petition, the one that started it all. We don't want you here. At first glance, it sounds harsh, maybe even unfair, but when you dig deeper, it's not just about dislike, it's about boundaries. Because Australians are asking something very specific, if this is a private commercial visit with ticketed events, paid appearances, and business ventures, then why should public resources be involved at all? Why should taxpayers carry any part of the burden? And that question, it doesn't have an easy answer, because it cuts right to the heart of Harry and Meghan's entire post-royal strategy. They stepped away to build independence, to control their narrative, to create financial freedom. But that independence comes with trade-offs. And now those trade-offs are catching up with them, not just in Australia, but globally. Spotify already walked away with harsh words that still echo. Netflix is recalibrating. Public sentiment is shifting. Governments are drawing lines. And suddenly, the space they're operating in, that in-between world of royalty and celebrity, feels less stable than ever. So what happens next? Because despite everything, the backlash, the petition, the silence from officials, the trip is still happening. They're still going to Sydney. They're still stepping onto those stages. They're still moving forward. The environment they're walking into is completely different from the one they left behind in 2018. Back then, they were embraced. Now they're being questioned. Back then, they were supported. Now they're being scrutinized. And back then, they were clearly part of something bigger. Now people are asking if they're standing alone. And maybe that's the real story here. Not just whether Australia is being too harsh or whether the backlash is justified, but whether Harry and Meghan's entire identity, their brand, their role, their place in the world is reaching a turning point. Because when a nation says we don't want you here, it forces a much bigger question. If not there, then where? And more importantly, as who?